So welcome, all the participants. As we were saying, we have 60 registered, probably expecting around about 40 to 45 to arrive. For those of you that are joined already, this is being recorded. I think you should have been told that as it came in, so that obviously you can take notes, but we will be sharing the recording post-webinar, and it will be going onto our website and our YouTube channel so that you can kind of catch up on anything if you miss or the phone rings mid-webinar. So welcome to our panelists. I'm Ian Corrigan. I'm the commercial director here at Coolcare. We have Jess Osmond from Nourish, so she's head of legal and compliance. And we have Steve, but we have new Steve, not old Steve, or I should say new Steve rather than original Steve. We have Steve Byram rather than Steve Spence, and he's the Chief Operation Officer at Cognisys. So welcome. I think everybody here probably knows who Coolcare are, and I think everybody probably knows who Nourish are. But outside of the sector, not everybody's going to know who Cognisys are. So we've got a little bit to talk about briefly who they are, but we'll go through a little agenda first and kind of move from there. So cybersecurity, what's it all about? What we're going to kind of talk about the threat of cybersecurity, sort of what the global hacking industry actually looks like. Steve's going to tell us all about this. And the truth is the robots really are out to get you. And I think that's one of the things that I pick up and often get encountered from customers who say, we're too small to ever be, nobody's going to look for us. We're too small. And I think that you're kind of missing a key point there. And yeah, ultimately humans really are the weakest link. And so because I grew up in the 80s, obviously Terminator, I think is going to come true at some point in time. So I figured I'd put that in there. Jess is going to talk to us from a compliance and process perspective about kind of some of the key things you might want to consider doing as an organization to kind of help you keep on track. And then, we're going to finish off with some top tips. So I suppose in this, the threat is the robot, and I guess you guys are the Linda Hamilton of the piece, I suppose. I suppose that's you and Jess there, Steve. So Steve, over to you. Tell us a little brief bit about Cognisys. You've got a hell of a client bank, very enviable. So tell us a little bit about what you guys get up to.
Rob, hi everyone. So Steve, new Steve from Cognisys. So thanks for the intro there. So we're a cybersecurity business. We do all things cybersecurity. So there are three sort of main arms to Cognisys. We do offensive security testing. So it's where companies pay us to behave like the bad guys. Imagine paying someone to break into your house so they can tell you how they broke in. That's in essence what we do. We also have a GRC consulting arm where we help businesses put the right processes in place to ensure their systems are secure. And then we have a managed vulnerability piece that's sort of fairly niche and specific. So we work in the cybersecurity space. We deal with a large range of clients. You can see some of them on the screen there, from BWRD Group through to and our smallest clients are three guys who all work from their bedrooms, and sort of everyone in between. So it's pretty cool. We have a nice exposure across the space, across a range of industries. And one thing that sort of does ring true is that cybersecurity is not specific to any one industry or sector or company size. It is an issue that impacts us all. And our client base is a fairly well represented, so spread of that, if you like. So quick intro to Cognisys. We've been around for 5-6 years. We're growing. We have sort of teams across 4 different countries now. So Ireland, France, the UK, and India. We're headquartered out of Leeds, and so we're Yorkshire born and bred, but we're sort of operating on a more global scale. So that's
excellent. Thanks. Just as an aside, we Coolcare know Cognisys because we get them to do our regular penetration testing. So they are the company we use to try and get into Coolcare. Unfortunately, they don't, but they do give us updates and recommendations that we apply and put into place. So it's and we will continue to do that because it's the best way forwards. We just had a few more people joining, so just a little quick refresher as you guys are coming in now. this is automatically recording, so we will share the recording post webinar. It'll be on our YouTube as well if you've missed the link and want to catch up later. And there is a live chat in one of the boxes I think you'll see on your screen that you can kind of like click on and like ask questions. And if it's okay with everybody, we quite like to have questions on the fly, just kind of like going through, and then a little space at the end for Q&A as well, because we're always mindful that if you are getting a presentation, you're sitting there kind of wondering about an answer to something, sometimes it's difficult to move on. So we're going to kind of like cover it as we go along. So feel free to just go live chat, webinar chat, stick those in there. So that's Cognisys. So I've got a quick question for you here, Steve, just before we move on to the next area. And I suppose it's for Steve and Jess, really, is that I think terminology in this cybersecurity is a sort of general catch-all, but we're going to talk about various different things that we can do to try and prevent sort of breaches, etc. But so how is this different from what an IT department does? And this came from a conversation one of my BDMs had. He said, so I was talking about, cybersecurity, multi-factor, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. My IT department does all of that. I don't. It's nothing to do with me." And you're like, "Is it really?" So I suppose where does the IT department start and stop? And that might be a bit more of a Jess question as well as a Steve question, really. Sort of because isn't it all this covered by I've got malware. Screening. I've got virus checkers. I'm good, right? I don't need any more advice, surely.
Yeah, I think. Hi everyone. I think that is quite often a common look at how people look at cybersecurity if they're not familiar. But I think the biggest message that we push, especially here at Nourish, that works for kind of everyone is cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. So it's not to be left just to the IT departments. Anyone could be the reason that something needs to be done, or training. And we're going to touch a little bit later on humans and how they can be involved in cybersecurity within organizations. But I think that's the key message: is it's everyone. It's not just down to your IT department. They can only do so much to protect an organization, and really everyone needs to protect them in order to be as secure as you can be.
You're on mute, and I see your mouth moving. But
all right, Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, no, it did concur with Jess there. What I will do is sort of the answers on the screen there. But before we get into that, it is a broad misconception, and it is a misconception. Yes, IT are the facilitators, right? They're the gatekeepers to digital systems. However, as the world moves into being more and more digital on a daily basis, that control is sort of being spread across the organizations. It no longer lives with IT solely. Businesses have operational departments who engage their own suppliers, manage supplier relationships, procure systems, send data between internal and external stakeholders. So we're in a position now where it no longer can be down to IT. It never really has been, but it certainly is moving away, or IT are losing the amount of control they have by the nature of the digital landscape we find ourselves in, right? People want to be more connected. People want to be more in tune with stakeholders. You want to be more responsive. You don't want any restrictions. You want to be able to work from anywhere on any device at any time in the day. And so what are we doing? Well, we're taking away control from IT. And we're, giving people the ability to work more flexibly, to sort of work around their lifestyles. And that's a big factor that we need to take into consideration, is this shift in the digital landscape. Pretty much every business is very reliant on digital systems. One of our big clients is a beef producer, right? They have farms and they raise cattle and they make beef steaks that end up in Tesco and Sainsbury. But without IT systems, their business grinds to a halt. And so, that's the nature of the world we find ourselves in, is that everything is supported by an IT digital system somewhere. But it can't be left to IT to...
That's a great example, isn't it? It's kind of, 30 years ago, there might have been a computer somewhere on a farm somewhere, but that would be it. Whereas if anybody watches like Jeremy Clarkson's farm, I mean the tractors themselves are virtual massive computers, never mind anything else. And yeah, there's an awful lot of data sort of flying around. And yeah, I mean, let's face it, I am in the boardroom that I built on the corner of my house. This is not a virtual background. It's genuinely not a bedroom. This is a real boardroom in my house. But you guys are at home, aren't you? So the nature of the beast, isn't it? I mean, I shared presentations with you electronically. Yeah, it's just kind of how everybody works. But it's quite a big sector. This, as in, I should say, the business is booming in the cyber hacking kind of industry, isn't it? It's quite a big thing going on out there.
Yeah, it is. It is. So I'll just sort of touch on one thing there. Cybersecurity is the biggest threat faced by organizations. It's a fact. And so if we look at these numbers, right? There it is. If cybercrime were a country, it would be the third largest economy in the world. Fact. Last year we saw the cybercrime space net more than $8 trillion. We're expecting that to be closer to $10 trillion this year, and we'll take over 11 by Q1 of next year, right? So it's a big industry, and because it's such a big industry, we have a lot of people wanting to get their slice of the pie. It's business as usual, it's lucrative, it's attractive, and it isn't particularly complicated either. There are a few intelligent people, let's not kid ourselves, but broadly speaking, it's not very difficult to get into cybercrime. It is a very broad spectrum. We have if you just go back there, sorry, and let's just run through some of the stats, because it hits home, right? So cybercrime, we're going to top $8 trillion this year, 666 billion a month, 154 billion a week. That's $21.9 billion a day. Right. So we worked that down. We're $255,000 a second. There are very few industries that can compete with that sort of commercial incentive from a sort of financial element with that. So yes, cybercrime is growing, and what we see is a continual year-in-year expansion of the industry. And we don't expect that to go the other way. So it's only going one way as we move into sort of being more digital. There we go. Yeah, it's more profitable than the global trade of all major illicit drugs combined. Yeah, we're all sort of aware of the famous movies they make about all the drug cartels. I think it makes better TV shows and better Hollywood hits than cybercrime does, but yeah, it is worth sort of contextualizing that the cyber industry is far bigger than the illicit drug trade globally.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny because when I grew up as a young man, it's kind of like cops and robbers, bank jobs, the Italian job, sort of you robbed physical stuff. Sometimes with a balaclava or a pair of tights or something over your head and sawn off. Nobody does that anymore. You don't need to do that. Organized crime does not rob banks anymore. That's daft. It's too difficult. You might get caught. It's dangerous. So they do other things. And really, what we're saying here is that there's another thing here that's actually not terribly difficult to get into and do. And it's the sort of crime is moving. I suppose that the question I'd have, if I do know the answer because I've read your slides, but is how does anybody make money out of this? I mean, how do you actually make money out of these sorts of things? I mean, people trying to drain people's bank accounts. I mean, what are we really talking about? And really, what's the threat to our industry?
Yeah, so it's varied. There isn't a single thing. If we look at the corporate enterprise space, extortion is the number one financial output, if you like. So stealing companies' data, convincing them to pay you a fine or a fee to not release that data to keep it safe. So typical extortion, right? Think Italian mafia, 1920s New York, the Godfather style, protection money in a digital modern era, right? So
imagining Don Corleone, you have a real nice database there. It'd be terrible if something happened to it. Yeah,
exactly.
At
an enterprise level, that's certainly number one at the moment. Also, it's worth adding that a lot of companies now have fairly comprehensive cyber insurance, and cyber insurance now at sort of an enterprise level also covers assistance to pay those ransomware fees, if you like. So yeah, there is an incentive for criminals to steal your data because you're insured and they know that it's an easy insurance claim. Right, so that's one way, right the way through to stealing bank account details of the old and vulnerable, and draining bank accounts. Like everything in between is covered as well. What is important to sort of understand is no one rarely, certainly no one on this call, has a target on their back. It is a very opportunistic industry. I have a saying up on the wall in my living room that it goes along the lines of I'm going to be as happy as a seagull with a stolen chip today. But yeah, we all know how seagulls behave, right? And so sort of cyber criminals are just like seagulls. They're very opportunistic. They're not, they're not sort of targeting you from the time you leave your house. But if you walk out of the fish and chip shop and you're a little bit unaware of them, they're going to seize the opportunity. And cybercrime is exactly the same, right? Why me? I'll be fine. I'm too small. And I'm not important. Yes, very true, but no one's targeting you individually. The methods, mechanisms, tools being used are very sort of reliant on spray and attack, right? These guys scanning in millions of IP addresses, systems, networks, devices across the globe. We're all connected to the internet. We're using the same internet connection that we're doing good with. And they're trying to then see what is open, right? It's the same as a guy walking around the neighborhood at night, opening all the car doors, right? He's not going to break anything. He's not going to smash any windows. But hey, if they manage to open the car door because you've not locked it, they're going to see what's inside. And that's the exact same approach we're seeing from a cybercrime perspective. Let's not kid ourselves. There are the big organizations who are targeted, but the really big organizations are targeted. But for the rest of us, right, so 90% of cyber criminal victims are just an opportunistic, we've not done something right, a user's made a mistake, a user's clicked on a phishing email, someone's made a mistake is what it boils down to. We've done something, whether intentional or unintentional, we've left our car doors unlocked, metaphorically speaking, and it just so happens that the one night in the year you leave your car door unlocked is the one night that they open your car door. And that sort of sums up where we are from a cybercrime perspective.
Or they were trying your car door every single night, and that was the one night that you left it unlocked.
Exactly, that too,
yeah. I mean, because it's automated tools, really, what we're talking about here. It's machines doing it rather than people doing it.
Yes.
I've got a couple of friends who are police officers, and they sort of speak about kind of ways in which you can kind of reduce how dangerous you look so how vulnerable you look. So various different things that you just naturally do when you, like when you go on holiday, leaving the lights on and radio playing and things like that. Just so you don't look like worthy of targeting. It's because somebody's walking down the street, they don't know who you are, they don't know. They're not like targeted, your name or anything like that. It's just pure chance. And I suppose it's back to kind of car crime with your kind of trying the doors. Yeah, I suppose there are people out there with really valuable cars, like Range Rovers and things like that, and people are specifically targeting to try and steal that high net worth thing, and they're putting extra effort into it. But actually, you have metaphorically 1,000 little robots trying all the door handles. You'll find some, and I guess that's what we've really got here is a robot who's out to get us. Here you go, there you go. But it kind of doesn't look like that for a start. It probably doesn't actually look like this either in reality. The robot that's actually searching for you probably looks a little bit more like that. It's just giving it a go, isn't it? It's just I'll just try your locks, see what happens.
What we also need to realize is that because the industry is so big, we have organized crime. There are people in Asian countries who go to office buildings. I am in our new London office. Today is 12-story building. We have a little bit of space. There are people who commute to buildings like this in cities, who have HR departments and operation departments, and who apply for leave and get paid with a wage slip every month, whose organizations are there for no other purpose than to extort and commit cybercrime. So it is very organized. But then we also have, 3 18-year-olds working from their mom's living rooms in Grimsby. being done for, sort of extorting more than 200 million pounds worth, and everything in between, so we can't rest on our laurels, and assume we know who these people are. Yes, there are, really organized outfits, but there are also lots of amateurs looking for a quick buck.
And I know from speaking to original Steve, there are places on the dark web where you have lists and you can obtain lists and buy lists of compromised passwords, and then
Yeah,
that's
and
what they'll
data,
use to try the lock. So it's not even trying for an empty door; they're actually trying with a key
yeah.
and just seeing if it works really. Again, electronically,
Exactly. Right. So we all have multiple systems. On my own iPhone, I have over 400 saved passwords. And they're all for websites and systems and apps. And every time you buy something online or book a restaurant, or anytime you put your email address in somewhere and need a password, right, that's saved somewhere. And what we see is that a lot of those sites now get compromised. There's a reason why they ask us to use different passwords on every app. So if I get your details, let's say I'm going to use Jess as an example here. Let's say Jess uses the same password for every website she goes to. If one of those 100 websites are compromised, I now have Jess's email address and password. I'm then going to run it through a system which is going to use that same email address password combination. And hey, if I'm lucky to stumble across something that lets me in, an open door, I'm in. And so what do we need to do? We need to sort of understand that those are the methods. Yes, data on the dark web is very cheap. For £10, you could probably buy 100,000 password records. Data is cheap. There is that much data. And so there are also automated mechanisms. You can buy a list of compromised passwords on the dark web. You can also buy an app that, has bundled an attack method together. And so, Lego blocks for cyber criminals, if you want to sort of use that analogy, right? So as long as you know where to look, you can buy the right Lego blocks, put them together, and you now have a cyber, crime business in a box. It sounds
it's kind of disturbing, really, isn't it?
but it's the reality of it, right? It isn't very difficult if you know where to look. And so, we need to change our thinking. 90% of the risks come from our own behavior. That is so true. We need to look at the ways we're making it easier for the bad guys. The industry as a whole is doing a good enough job at making it easier for them. And what are we doing? How are we contributing? And it really goes back to basics, right? We know when we leave our house, we lock the front door, we check that the windows are locked, we lock our car at night. These are like really basic things that we understand as people, yet we seem to still, be in a position where we don't quite get it from a cyber.
Yeah, and I guess that's what Jess is going to tell us about now. Really, is what are the procedural compliance versions of checking I've locked my door, set the alarm, etc., turn the lights on or off. So yeah, excellent, Jess.
Thanks, Steve. That was really useful. Yeah, I think the main thing, obviously, we're coming at this from a kind of software perspective and a digital platform. But these tips and tricks, and especially some of the things we're going to talk about, aren't kind of directly linked to that. We do what we do to protect you, but whether you're using a digital system or not, these things can affect you in the same way, and you can use these tips and tricks without having digital platforms in place. So we touched on it briefly there with Steve, that humans are a risk. Humans are your biggest risk. So untrained employees clicking on links to things that they shouldn't be, that people are trying to infiltrate systems, whether they're trying to plant things, whether they're just trying to gain access to see if they can get in. That's a big risk, whether you're using software platforms or whether that's your own IT infrastructure and your own internal email system. But most of the time, employees are not doing this on purpose. Employees are not doing this maliciously. That might be the case every so often, but as a general rule, humans being a risk is because they did it accidentally, or they didn't realize, or they were unaware of what they were doing and the implication that might have. So that's our biggest advice around the employee risk factor.
I've got a question for you there on that. So I mean, we're a software company, and of course we have we've got a company that sends us phishing emails to testers, so we kind of do that. But we actually currently find them rather sometimes pretty obvious to spot. Actually, they're a bit too obvious. But what would you say the markers of what you would describe as a phishing email would look like? I mean, what are these sorts of things? Have you got any sort of experience of the sorts of things that people sort of look out for or should look out for? And yeah, they should probably get some formal training. But what are we really talking about here?
I mean, anything. And I think that's the biggest problem. We have a similar system that sends us generated emails that everybody gets a different one, once or twice a month. And, we've got it set up so it can look like it's coming from managers or senior managers or colleagues or however that might be. But we're not wholly concerned with the ones we're sending. Obviously, the bigger risk is the ones we're not. And we've seen some really interesting ones. So we've seen emails that look perfectly genuine, but the font in the letter A is different in an email address and it's got a squiggle on the top of it as opposed to not having that, which indicates that that's not the genuine email address. So they're the really, really tricky ones.
Like PayPal, but it's with a Cyrillic A or but it looks like an A, but it's not quite.
Yeah, so the email address matches, but the font of that A is the only thing that gives away the difference. So they're the really kind of advanced ones that even with the best training, some people are going to fall for. You do get the obvious ones, like we get, our CEO emails me at least a couple of times a year with a really urgent task that he needs me to reply to this email right away for. And you just know that, they're the
don't
ones
ring
that
me.
come up.
Just do this. Yeah, I worked at a company where a colleague in accounts got that. Just can you wire this money to or pay this money to somebody? And it was like, I've just literally just seen the guy who sent me the email. You never mentioned it. Yeah, I think the other one I've seen a few times is when somebody's email gets hacked. We get emails from what looks like the right person, and it's invoices for things. And as a commercial director, I get invoices, and it's like, hang on a minute, I'm not expecting this, and it's fine if I'm not expecting it. But if it's hacked from somebody that you've already been in communication with, yeah, they're already kind of getting within your sort of I suppose what's the word, your kind of skepticism is getting lowered because it's like, well, I know who the person is. They have sent me invoices before. I wasn't expecting this, but maybe I've forgotten something. So they're already kind of nearly there, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think one of the we've seen some really clever ones lately that are even like QR codes. So you just scan the QR code rather than a link directly. So that's a new one that we've kind of seen starting to sort of reach the surface. But we often find as well, like formatting of emails can look very different on a mobile device to on the web. People are often quite conscious when they open emails on the web and, they look at it and the format's a little bit off or the font's the wrong color or whatever, the logo's in the wrong place. Think obvious things that they would pick up that when you open that on a mobile device, it's actually all skewed anyway. And people are often looking at emails now on the go, in a rush. Everyone's really busy. That tends to be the time when people do get caught out that little bit easier. So yeah, we find humans are not doing anything wrong, but making sure they're aware to look.
Is tricked, duped, and I guess using we just described a number of different kind of clever psychological tricks to make you kind of more likely to click on it. If it's written in a foreign language and you're not expecting it, and I'm not clicking on that. I suppose the old the kind of like early days of the internet, Nigerian prince. That seems really unlikely, but no, we've kind of moved beyond that one quite easily into more tricky things. So yeah, phishing is certainly something that everybody has to look out for. So what about sort of like obsolete, unsupported things? What's your kind of thoughts there?
So obviously we're coming at this from a software provider point of view. Outdated software, however that might be, whatever software that might be, can leave you open to those hackers, to those machines. That can be your open door. If you're not doing security patches or they're not up to date with the newest trends of what those hackers or what keys those people are trying, that's the way in. That's a really easy way in. So making sure that things are up to date and that you're using the right software or the right systems, and that the provider is doing what they need to do for that as well. Like we take that really seriously I know that CoolCare do as well, in terms of making sure that we are putting the best foot forward for our customers on secure systems and making sure that we're constantly doing penetration testing and we'll come to standards and things in a minute. But those things that we can do to kind of help support people picking those systems, But yeah, that's a really easy kind of way in, which can lead to those open doors.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I think it's about 6 months ago, I was speaking to a customer who had a system that I wasn't that familiar with, but said, "Oh, I need to change it because it's on Internet Explorer and that's going to become unsupported. But I'll be all right for a while because nobody's going to want to hack me." I remember saying, "Well, I think one of the things you got to bear in mind, Mr. Customer, was when it's unsupported, if there is an exploit found, nobody's going to fix it." That's what it means by unsupported. It's not like, oh, it's broken, can I get some IT support on it? It means that somebody's found a way to get into this thing and nobody will stop it from being an exploit. And that could mean anything. And I think their customer going, "Oh, I didn't realize that's what it really, I didn't realize that's what that meant. I thought it was something else." Maybe I'll move it forward, move the timeline forward a little bit then. But yeah, I think that's, we do see a bit of that. I think with certain systems that are, are getting older. People who, early adopters are now kind of like, I do need to move on to something else. I think also, this is more of an IT policy, but ensuring people are updating their, applying the patches from Microsoft and also their own servers. If they have any on-premises servers, the server software itself needs patching because they have exploits, and so do routers and other things. So yeah, there's quite a lot of different things that could need updating. It's not just like updating Facebook or something. It's more important than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just the software itself, it's the device in which you're using that software or the system in which you're using that software. So if you've got a device that's no longer supporting updates from the app stores, you won't be getting the new security updates, even if the system or the software you're using is providing it. So making sure that you're kind of up to speed on that, on whether the device or the system you're using to use that software is still accepting those updates, is one that people can often not see. They see the updates and go, "Oh, great, my software's up to date," and it will always say it's up to date because it's not taking on the new updates. So that's a good point.
I think I thought this was an interesting point because this is your point here is not cyber security; it's just security. The secure your data point. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, so obviously I come in it from a kind of legal and compliance viewpoint, which kind of merges those two together, because in general, you look at GDPR, it's not just the kind of hackers that are your reason there that your data might not be secure. So we're talking obviously about software and using it digitally, but people often, don't think about the filing cabinet that's left unlocked in the communal, kitchen, or, the shared office spaces, or the fact that a lot of people work remotely and people share desks and office spaces. If you leave paperwork lying around on a desk, or you print something and it's left in a printer, these are all ways in which your data could get into the wrong hands. Most office blocks have, communal cleaners. They could quite easily walk around, pick something up and go, "Oh, what have I got here? That's interesting." And, they could be the mother of the 3 boys sat in the living room in Grimsby. You never quite know what or who is looking at your data. So it's not just a case of protecting it online, it's just protecting it as a general rule. So
and that's actually that is step number 1 GDPR, isn't it? It is security by design. And I actually remember speaking to a customer about this. They said, "No, we want to upload," because Coolcare's got unlimited cloud storage for documents. And they said, "Oh, I want to put all my documents online. We've got filing cabinets. We've got loads of filing cabinets full of things." And I was kind of arguing that I don't. Do you need to put it all online? That's a huge job. I said, so we've got like 10 filing cabinets. Like, bloody hell, where do you keep them? They actually had one of their rooms dedicated to it, so they couldn't even have a service user in the room because it's filled with filing cabinets. And it's like, oh, okay, that's there's a double whammy by getting your documents out of there. But do you really, really, really need to have them online? Because that's a task in itself. But you got to do something. You can't just leave them lying around. I've got a question for you. Just do you ever encounter people sort of talking about having on-premises systems? I don't want the cloud. I'll keep everything safe in a cupboard in my office.
Yes, we do. So we often, we're a fully cloud-based organization, so we don't have on-prem servers of any kind. So we often, do find that there are some organizations that feel more comfortable with on-prem solutions. They have big server rooms that are very secure, all stored under lock and key, and that's you know, that's all very well until that is compromised. So the backups for that is really difficult because the backups are normally stored in the same room as the original on-prem service. So you don't really have a secure backup. The benefit of the cloud is you can access it from anywhere, right? So you don't need to be in that server room to know that your data is secure. Again, one of the points I'm going to touch on a little bit later is around, you know, business continuity and how you can make sure, you know, you've got a backup plan for that. And people often think about, oh, you know, if my software system's unavailable, what am I going to do? But if the power goes out in an on-prem solution and you don't have a generator, or, you know, or there's a fire, or there's a power cut, or, you know, any of these things that you can't control, there's no way of accessing that data. That data is no longer secure. And I just think the cloud gives you that, the
Yes,
backups
it
are
also
not in the
spreads
same place.
it spreads it out as well, because you can have mirrors and multiple backups and backups of the backups, etc. I think I'm quite good for analogies as well. Well, I'm known for analogies. I'm good at them. It's a little bit like saying, I don't trust banks. I'm going to keep my money under the mattress. It's like, until somebody burns your house down, then it's not so good.
Exactly. It works until it doesn't, right? So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's the kind of the message that we want to give is digital done right. I mean, it says on the side, digital done right is more secure. But in order to do that, you need to make sure that your software provider is helping you in the ways that they need to, in order for that to be the case.
I think, yeah, also, I suppose the other thing about, I mean, you said it, but I'll just reiterate it. Cloud is actually fantastic. In Cool Care, we have a bit of sometimes we sort of say, you can see that from Antigua. And it's because our years ago, our CEO called up one of our care homes and said, what's going on with XYZ, and it's like, because he was ringing from Antigua, and you can, you know, digital systems allow you to be anywhere. You can work from home, you can access the same place, that in itself is a boost over, you know, I'm trying to access something, you know, that's you know, the internet's down in the head office, therefore nothing works anymore. It's like, no, that just doesn't happen. You don't have that with Netflix or Disney Plus or anything. It just keeps working because it's cloud as well, you know, and
And
it's
no one knows where
hosted in
that
the same
cloud
places.
is, right? Like,
Not really.
everyone will know where your service room is. If you have your server room in your head office, everyone can go on Google and find out where that is, and that makes you slightly easier, you know, for those people that are looking for unlocked doors, because if they can get into your building even, you know, or if they can speak to the right IT person when they're stood at reception, you don't know what information they might be able to get out of you if they're asking the right questions, because they're really good at this. Whereas the cloud, you can move it quite quickly if you had to. So even if someone did find the location, or did there was an issue, you know, that's, like you say, that's a backup of a backup. It's much quicker to sort of save that data than if it's in an on-prem and someone walks through the door.
I think there's also just another point. It's not really cybersecurity per se, but one of the benefits we use AWS as and so does a lot of companies like Netflix and those sorts of organizations. But you've also got kind of automatic load balancing as well. So we have spikes throughout the month. People running payroll at certain times. You know, people running loads of reports certain times. We can see it. It's all graphed and charted, etc. So normally in a sort of a limited system, it would reduce your sort of delivery. Everything would slow down. It doesn't work so well. But because it's all automatically load balanced, our systems automatically open up additional servers when they're reaching sort of 80%. So nobody notices a degradation in speed or anything like that. And that's not kind of security, but that's not so easy to do in an on-prem. And you know, I've got a whole lot of spare servers because I need them for 20 minutes on a Monday morning, one time a month. You don't do that, you know. I'll just have to live with the thing not working very well, and everybody complains, etc. So I suppose that's another, you know, another cloud benefit, I guess, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, some essential cyber requirements. You can tell this is to the audience here. You can tell this is from compliance because it's got lots of detail, but it is good detail. So that's why it's all there.
Yeah, we've popped the detail on the side just so that, you know, you can take it away or you can refer back to it later. But there's kind of key things that you can look for from any platform provider. This isn't specific to, you know, Nourish or Cool Care or any other systems you may be using that do similar functionality. So this is just platform providers in general. So anyone that's kind of dealing with any kind of personal data should be looking to evaluate security practices as a platform provider. There's some really good certifications out there. So ISO 27001 around information security management systems is a really, really strong one. It's an internationally recognized standard. Both Nourish and CoolCare both have that. And that kind of gets audited externally every year. So they take all the practices that we say we do under those frameworks to protect our customers and check that we are doing those. And Cyber Essentials Plus as well. So there's 2 levels to Cyber Essentials. There's Cyber Essentials itself, which is a kind of basic screening questionnaire. And then you've got Cyber Essentials Plus, which digs a little bit deeper into the organization. Again, they do external audits, they take samples, they check in to say you're doing exactly what you say you're doing, and generally ensure compliance with GDPR as a whole. So they are the kind of 3 main things that we suggest that you should look for in a platform provider, because it shows you they're taking it seriously. It shows you that they mean what they say when they say information security is important to them. So with those things, you can see that they're actually actioning what they say they do. Secure protocols, we've touched briefly on, communication of data and how it can move about, especially within clouds and things. So that communication, those channels should be protected. These are encryption layers, so that gives you that kind of reassurance that even if anyone did access that data, they still can't quite get to it. There's layers between that kind of open door and when they can get to that. So look for those kind of things, ask the questions. They should be able to explain the different types they have and what that means, and reassure you that that's the right level for the data that you're sharing. There should be other things that they can help you consider as well. They might not all be applicable for every platform or each kind of thing you do, but multi-factor authentication, you've probably all typed in your email address somewhere and been sent a text to a one-time code or things like that. That's the most kind of obvious and most commonly used multi-factor authentication. But there's other types, so things like device management. So your device is approved to log into the app or the platform that you're logging into. So if you try to log in with a different device, it stops you. So even if someone got your username and password, unless they've got an approved device, they can't get in. So there is other ways of multi-factor authentication than a one-time passcode, because sometimes in the sectors that we work in, that's not quite as easy to set up, but there should be options out there. They should be able to talk you through the different layers that they've got there in order to support you. Another one that's really useful, especially with systems such as CoolCare and Nourish, is role-based access control. So not only do people have access to the systems, so you can see all the information that people do have access to, but you can limit that down. So you can split that by, location, by role. If they don't need access to everything, don't give them access to everything. And then there's no risk of them accessing something they shouldn't, or sharing something they shouldn't, or not realizing what they have. So that's a really good way of just limiting that risk. Just give people what they need to know, and then at least for sure what people are looking at and what that kind of risk containment is if something should happen. And I think the last one that we kind of I've touched on encryption already, but those backups should be encrypted. So make sure that the system provider you're using can tell you about the backups they've got, the systems they've got in place to protect those backups, but also that's encrypted. It's no good having your money under the mattress and some under the cushion in the sofa. That's not gonna protect you if the house burns down. So you need to make sure that those backups are secure, they are somewhere else, they are encrypted, and ask the questions. Any solid platform provider should be happy to talk to you about these cyber and security questions. We have no issue with it. I know CoolCare are quite happy to talk about it. So any platform provider that's confident in their information security should be quite happy to answer all these questions.
Yeah, and I think we're not going to name any names, but there has been a breach in some suppliers to the industry that didn't have encrypted backups. Their backups were in the same location as their main live system, and they were subject to a ransomware attack. The system availability was down for a long period of time. People couldn't use it. Interestingly, the penetration came in one direction, but it affected much larger systems. And yeah, the issue is that they basically encrypted the backups in place. So the hackers encrypted the backups where they sat so that nobody could access it, and it was ransomware to millions of pounds to unlock that which was recorded. And I know Steve mentioned in previous conversations that's not always what they do. Sometimes if they'll delete everything and then they'll give it back to you if it's, so again, it's just ways in which you can kind of like do what, I think back to the there's no end in sight in what you can do to protect yourself. So let's do as much as we possibly can to make you less of a target. So you mentioned sort of like the human element is big here, isn't it? Yeah, we get your platform has got all these things, but you mention a lot about humans being the kind of the weakest link in some of them, well, a lot of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people always think about their own employees and their own people, but actually you're talking about the risk of the people within those platform systems as well. So, the employees at Nourish are as much a risk as the employees to the customer. So ask those questions when you're looking at platform providers. Do they do training for their employees? Is that an annual training, or is that part of an induction that's then not done again for years and years? Because that's not the same thing. People need to be reminded of information security. It needs to be up to date. There's new, as Steve was talking about at the beginning, there's new ways to hack all the time. And people are not looking for them if they don't know about them. So making sure that training is, interesting content when it comes to information security. We know people don't often, look forward to information security training, but it is important. So try and find a way to make it interactive, or make sure that people have really understood what it is you're trying to achieve. We've talked about, multi-factor authentication. We've talked about role-based permissions, but again, that doesn't just have to be on the platforms you're using. Do that on your own internal systems. Make sure that those things are in place wherever they can be. If there's the option of multi-factor authentication, there's no harm in turning it on. It's only a safety feature there. It's not going to cause any, or it shouldn't cause any problems.
I mean, I've got a comment on that. So Coolcare's developing MFA, should be available in within the next 3 months, probably earlier, but we'll just have to see. Any kind of development, you never want to put a line in the sand. But we asked loads of customers about this, and hardly anybody wanted it. And it's one of the few things we've ever developed that we know people need, but people are telling us they don't want it. And it's interesting that the DSPT is now caught up with this point, of which previously it said if you've got multi-factor authentication, you should turn it on. Now they're saying if you've got it and you aren't turning it on, you need to have evidence from the senior management team to say why you're not using it. Which again, it's swinging that needle more to kind of, I don't know, why don't you use your key safe? Oh, it's really inconvenient. I can't be bothered. Is that a really good reason for why you got broken into? Because I suppose the additional effort to do MFA versus what could happen, and I think that's one of the things that people perhaps don't think about is the what ifs, and as you were saying, kind of like have a plan afterwards, etc., which is a later point. But the hassle factor is minimal by comparison to all your data being ransomed or your care plans being locked away. I don't know how we'd start with that, to be honest, if you couldn't access your care plans.
Well, exactly, and that leads me on nicely to the kind of next point around everyone's very much, it won't happen to me. We're only a small provider, like Steve was saying earlier. No one is targeting individuals, but it could happen. It could happen to anyone. It could happen at any time. We often find that people think about the disaster recovery and the kind of business continuity plans after the fact, so they do it in retrospect, which is good. At least they've then realized and got that in place. But why not do it before? If you can put plans in place for any reason why any of your digital systems might be unavailable. I mentioned it earlier. If there's a power cut and you lose the Wi-Fi, certain systems like Nourish, for example, will work offline, but only as long as there's charge in the devices. So, if that power's out for a long period of time, that there's no kind of saying how you can kind of action that. If you can't access that data, it's useless to you. So making sure that you've got things in place. If you were evacuated due to fire, or there was a flood, or it doesn't have to be that the digital system has been affected. That is another contender. You do need to look at the fact that the system itself might be in an emergency maintenance period, or might be unavailable, or things have obviously happened in the media recently with CrowdStrike. You never know what might happen to the systems you're using, so you do need to look at ulterior plans in the event that they're not available for kind of any reason. And one of the things that we do at Nourish, and we're not protective over it, we do offer our customers like a guidance template on a business continuity plan as part of their onboarding. So it gives them some sort of starter points on things to look at, some kind of key plans to put in place going from particularly paper to digital, because it is different in terms of those plans. And so we do find that's quite useful. And then checking those behaviors. So, you say there about regular audits of it. You need to make sure that you're doing these things. It's all very good putting them in place and saying, yes, we've done that. We've written a plan, but you need to check that plan. If you change a system, you need to make sure you're updating that plan. Employees, there's no point doing it just when people start with you. If things change and things are changing in the kind of space, you need to make sure you're updating people with the new threats and making them aware of new things that kind of come about. So making sure that you're actually checking your organization is doing those, reviewing them, making sure they're up to date. And passwords. I mean, we've already talked about passwords. Steve did a really good touch on that earlier.
Steve's got a whole bit about passwords in a minute, but I think the in a way it's a kind of a standard classic feedback loop, isn't it? As in, I put a process in, and then see how make sure first off, decide on the process I'm going to put it, make sure everybody's applying that process, training, everybody's aware of it, the whole point of it. And then checking that we're doing it right, and do we need to update process and keep circling back, etc. I mean that's totally classic ISO. I mean that is ISO all over, in it. But I think that sort of leads us on to the next kind of point is, where do you start with this? What if you're 40-bed care home? And again, I'm saying 40-bed that don't know what they're doing. It's just I've got a lot of other things to deal with. You've just given me another thing to worry about. Thanks very much. Where do I even start? And I think the Cognisys suggests that why don't you look at a standard? You don't even have to certificate the standard. Why don't you just try and follow it? And you mentioned there that you yourself have some assistance documentation in that regard. And I mean, I think GDPR itself is very, I mean, I know everybody hates GDPR, apart from maybe you, Jess, but for God's sake, but it's got some great principles within it. And there's lots of people out there to help with that. Secure by design is, I think, number two sort of point. But then there are lots of different standards out there, aren't there?
Yeah,
that you could follow and not necessarily certificate in.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That we use the word framework there. You can use them as a framework. You don't need to go through the expense of a full implementation or go through the, audits. We know how busy, care providers particularly can be, especially in homes where, managers are doing multiple jobs, and this is then just another thing that lands on their desk that they need to be concerned with. You don't need to do the full framework, but if you take pieces from each of the different frameworks, there's lots of information, online, as well as things like this webinar. Like, you can take little pieces, and any kind of little bit is better than nothing. So even if you just implement things slowly and you go, okay, that one's a quick win for us, that we could do, those frameworks offer a really good guidance. You don't need to go through the full kind of scale, because some of it won't be applicable to small organizations. But some of it will, and I think that's really useful, is just do what you can.
That's a great piece of advice. So we got Steve's going to talk to us about passwords, and I'm going to just put it out there, put the fear of God into all of us. But yeah, passwords are probably the biggest Achilles heel in the entire thing, really, isn't it? It's the human I don't know, weakness, I think.
Yeah, we have to ask ourselves why are passwords so weak? So I think a half of it is as an IT industry, we need to put our hands up and accept that we've probably done an injustice. There are technical mechanisms that the IT industry should have taken sort of control over and designed better. But hey, we are where we are. The other side of it is people and our behaviors. I don't think for a long time, we didn't educate people on, why password protection and good password behavior is so important. We are trying to do that retrospectively now. But I just don't think people get it. It's not a high enough priority for people until something goes wrong. It's one of these. We've all seen the memes, like cybersecurity budget before a breach, like nothing, and then cybersecurity budget after a breach. It's limitless. And the same applies in passwords. People tend to have this nonchalant arm's length view on it. It'll happen to someone else until something happens to them. My wife's an artist. She has an Instagram account with, I don't know, many tens of thousands of followers. And something simple like that. That she's constantly, there are constantly people trying to get into her Instagram account. And many people sort of suffer the same thing. So it's not even work, right? Or to a lot of us, our social media accounts could purely be social media. For the sake of it, but because of the reach, people are trying to get into it, and bad password behavior is the cause of a lot of heartache, both personally for people as well as professionally for organizations. We also need to take into account that organizations, have mechanisms to cope and recover. Personally, we don't insure ourselves against cybersecurity, yet businesses tend to do it. Businesses tend to have mechanisms in place to establish, right, business continuity processes, etc. Personally, if we lose money, we don't have the means and the mechanisms in place to recover that. Weak passwords and poor password behavior. Practical things. There's an old lady who I sort of am friends with, and I just helped her set up multi-factor authentication, and it confused the life out of her. She's retired in her 70s. She now gets it, right? She phones me every time a multi-factor authentication pop-up comes up. It's like, is this legit? And I'm happy to help her, but it's simple things like that. Have we set up multi-factor authentication for ourselves? It's free, it's available, it's there. Gmail, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they're all supported. Have we made use of it? Have we set it up correctly? One of the services Cognisys provide is we have a password tracking service. We do what the bad guys do. So we get onto networks, we steal the passwords and the hash files from the networks, and we run it through a very sophisticated process. And you'll be amazed at how many passwords we can crack quite simply. And if we can do it, the bad guys can do the same thing. So, we all know what we should be doing with passwords. It's just, are we actually doing it? Use the devices we have. Apple and Android mobile phones will automatically suggest a new password for every website. Use that. Like, the tech providers, tech companies, mobile device manufacturers are doing everything they can now to make it as easy as possible for people. So utilize the free services we have access to, and don't ever use passwords. Like,
I think one of the things that sort of original Steve sort of pointed out, and that's kind of for these slides. These are your slides that have reformatted them slightly, but one of the issues is that the passwords are weak. They are words and maybe numbers at best, not many other additional characters. They're often quite logical, as in, so a word with 1, 2, 3, 4 or something on the back of it, because it's easy to remember. And the kind of the weakness here is the human part is you can't remember so many different passwords, so you don't try and remember different ones. You just try and remember one, and then you reuse that password everywhere. And I guess for the fact that we're talking to sort of business customers here, the problem we have is that they will reuse the password that they used on Facebook on your system, and that's the problem, because somebody got and they used it on a ordering some plant pots or something, and that one got hacked, and then everything else gets hacked, like a line of cards, a dominoes kind of falling. And you just sort of mentioned that weak passwords are a bit of an issue, but people duplicate passwords, and it's actually lots of different people do that. It's really common.
The reality of it is, one important takeaway is don't reuse passwords, right? Out of all the password advice I can give you, don't reuse passwords. We have a client, they're an Edinburgh-based government entity, right? We password cracked them, 1,200 staff, right? The word Rangers appeared in more than 45% of their passwords. Do you get what I mean? So it's
and the other one was Celtic.
It's just the reality of the world we find ourselves in. Let's be a little bit more intelligent. Unless a company, it's an expensive process for us to do that. But unless, a company goes through that, you never really can actually understand what people are doing with their passwords. But yeah, use a password manager. They're free. That dozens of them, Apple and Android mobile phones have them built in for free. Use a password manager, use a password manager, use a password manager, and don't reuse passwords. Simple as that. Lots of different passwords is better than one complicated password used everywhere. I have one really complicated password and my Face ID to get into my password manager. Good luck getting it, but it's the only one password I need to remember. The rest are, 32 character random things like that there.
What you're really talking about there is kind of like, it sometimes this refers to like brute forcing, but kind of like, well, I'll give it get the system to try different possible versions. As opposed to, I think that's a great little box that you guys have made. It's like, yeah, go on then, go try that one. It's because it's got all the different characters you can have there, so it's really difficult to try and break that one. Whereas David 1965,
exactly. So yeah, use a password manager and don't ever reuse passwords. It's difficult. Those of you with Apple phones, go into your settings, go to your Apple ID, and it'll actually tell you how many shared passwords you have. Close your eyes, sit down, pour yourself a strong whiskey, do it, go through the exercise of fixing it. But yeah, use a password manager and don't ever reuse passwords.
That's brilliant. I think we've implemented that here at Coolcare. So password managers, and MFA. Everything we ever have is MFAs as well. So it's something that is very mindful of, but we would be mindful of it because we're a software company. I think the purpose behind this is to say, hey, everybody, just you also should be considering these things as well. I'm also quite surprised the fact that you think, well, older folks would probably do this. It's my mum and dad reusing passwords, but it's actually no, it's not just old people that do it, older people. Kind of everybody does it, and they're pretty bad at it across the board. Everybody's guilty of exactly the same kind of behaviors, which I guess is the point, isn't it? And that's the point. Right, great. Well, thank you very much. Well, we've got some takeaways. I'm just going to cover these off. I'm just mindful of time here. So some top tips to take away. It's a combination of what Jess has told us and what Steve's told us. I think we recognise the employee is kind of the weaker point in all of this. It's a point of failure that kind of keeps reoccurring. So training is a great idea. So there are companies out there that provides the phishing links, send things through. There's e-learning. I'm sure many of your e-learning platforms that you probably already use will have these as modules available. Check them out, have a look, off you go. General GDPR kind of behaviors, safe data handling, clean desks, especially with sort of hot desks, shared desks. We just don't have any at Coolcare. We don't have any customer data in our system, in our own personal systems at all. We just don't handle it. We just stay away from it. But that's not always possible. But yeah, again, if I looked over the counter or walked into the admin office in a home, what could I get? What could I see? National insurance numbers, dates of birth. Maybe some useful stuff if you were in that way inclined. So it's all about employee training. Password manager, if you didn't get that from the glowing thing and Steve saying it about 50 times, that's a really important thing you need to consider. Jess's point, really good plan for disaster recovery. I know when customers have had problems with security in the past because they ask me lots of security questions when we're doing an initial demos, and people are like, loads of information. Can I have this? Can I have this? Security policies. Where do you do your backups? All that sort of stuff. And I'd really like it if people everybody asked me that, but the people that ask me that are people who have already had the problem. And that's exactly on Jess's point, is that you become an expert. And Steve's point is a budget for cybersecurity was that. I've had a breach. It's now, it's almost unlimited. How about doing that before we get to that point? And that's kind of back to the frameworks. The frameworks point towards these points, the various different frameworks you can follow. Talk about, let's making sure that you're doing these things. And I guess that's a risk assessment, as in I'm going to do a little bit of extra work to prevent something that's perhaps a little unlikely, seemingly getting more likely, but if it did happen, it would be really disastrous. So again, really important. Role-based access is a no-brainer. Pretty much every system does that. That's again number one, GDPR, secure by design. People should not be accessing anything they're not supposed to, and therefore, if you set that up yourself, you're actually making it easier for that employee to be compliant because they couldn't get into it even if they wanted to. So you're protecting yourself, and in a way, making life easier. And multi-factor authentication, again, making it easier. It doesn't have to be complicated. Working with their different customers. CoolCare's first version of multi-factor authentication, when it comes out, it's going to be sending an email through to that individual. Why email? Because people don't always have company mobiles, don't want to use company mobiles, don't have company mobiles, where they're working. So we're doing that first, but we'll be looking and reviewing ourselves as to whether or not we want to add additional more layers of complexity in that area. And I think MFA, again, it's somewhat of a no-brainer because it's just the way things are these days. There's lots of things ask for MFA, so why not just switch it on if it's available? And of course, the DSPT now says if you can have it, you really should be doing it, and if you're not doing it, you have to account for why you're not doing it. So effectively create an audit trail as to why you chose not to lock your keys away properly. So that's kind of it from us. The questions were live as we were there. I don't think we've got anybody's asked any questions, so I can only assume that we've done a pretty reasonably decent job. If you want to find out more about Cognisys, you can go onto their website. Same for CoolCare, same for Nourish. CoolCare, just to finish off, making operating your care home easier, more efficient, more profitable. This webinar is recorded. We will send through the link through to you by email once we've made it all nice and tidy. It's also going to be saved on our YouTube channel and on our website if you want to check us out at a future point in time. Refer back to it. If you've got any questions, we're at the Care Show. Come see us. And also for any of you that are existing customers, we have monthly training webinars from our training team. One of those is going to be sent out very shortly to keep everybody up to date on what's happening. Updates on how to use CoolCare. And again, they'll be on our YouTube channel as well if you want to find out more. So thank you very much for joining us to talk about cybersecurity. It's been really educational.
Great stuff. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.